Hi, everybody. This is the Dr. Debunk weekly podcast show. On this show, I'm going to be debunking the medical myths, garbage, and crap that's spread by doctors and other health professionals. Dr. Debunk is the medical truth teller. Today's podcast is about the circulatory theory of aging. What is the circulatory theory of aging? Well, for those of you that are new and haven't heard this, one of the goals of Dr. Debunk is to educate people on the principles that make us optimally healthy at all decades of life. What are the things that you have to do to have great high quality of life at every decade of your life? And so it's divided up differently by health professionals like me that believe in these principles, but I've cut it up into 10 theories of optimal health training and education, 10 concepts based on real scientific principles, health principles, at all levels: the biochemistry, cell molecular biology, nutritional, naturopath, doctors, all of us that are contributing to this field. And so one of the first theories I talk about, and I have a video on Debunk, I believe, on Dr. Debunk website about this. But this is the first one in podcast form. And it's the circulatory theory of aging. So what is that? Well, to dive right in, the circulatory theory of aging says the rate at which you will age, fast or slow, the rate at which you will age is based on the rate at which you lose circulation to the organs of your body. Furthermore, the rate at which you march towards disease, accelerate that or retard that marching towards disease, the rate at which you get disease is based on the rate at which you're losing circulation to the organs of your body. And so the details of all the other ones you can get on other podcasts, but all of these theories contribute to this thing of the rate at which you age, the speed at which you age, and the speed at which you get disease. Obviously, we want to slow those down as much as possible. Now, all these 10 theories have consequences. They're all important, but the consequences can be more if you violate these principles than some of the other ones. Now, the circulatory theory is in the top one or two. Probably chronic inflammation and circulation are the two most important factors that if you violate these theories, you will age and get disease faster than anything else you do. So, as I said, you can look at the other podcasts or listen to the other podcasts about what that does. But the final little thing, just as a review for those of you that haven't heard me endlessly talk about this, is the whole point is to have high quality of life at all decades of life, to not die of disease, but to die of old age, and have a full lifespan of 105 years, plus or minus 5, with great quality all the way there. And so, let's get into that, what this means. What does the circulatory theory of aging really mean? And why do we lose? So how this works is, we'll say somewhere around 40, 45 years old, we start to lose circulation or blood flow, a small percentage, to every organ in our body. Probably about 2 to 3%, starting around, say, 45 years old. And why that is way beyond the scope of this discussion. The main parameter, the main factor that's causing us to lose circulation is explained in the inflammatory theory of aging, which is another podcast that I've already done, and you can find that. But sufficient just to say that the average person, the average American that's living a typical American life starts to lose 2 to 3% of circulation to the terminal capillary beds in our body, in every organ in our body, from that point on. Now, each organ is affected differently by this phenomenon. In other words, your muscles may be losing 1% of circulation every year starting at 45, and your liver may be losing 3% circulation. It's different for each organ system based on the parameters of your life. So the more abusive you are to your life and different organs, the faster they'll lose circulation. The more optimal health principles you live, the slower or you slow down the rate. So let me give an example. The liver. The liver's a great example. So as a physician of 33 years, I've been in the business of watching people age and die. I've been watching people die of disease. And one way I've learned optimal health principles is I've watched how patients that die of disease die over the last 33 years, and I've paid attention to their life factors in more detail than the average doctor has done. Because if you want to know how not to die of disease, well then live the opposite life of all the people that are dying of disease. And that has helped me form these concepts. And so, if you want to die of a disease of your organ, I can tell you how to do it. I'm an expert. I'm your guy. So let's say you want to kill your liver with cirrhosis. Well, I'm your guy. Sign me up. If you want to kill your liver, all you got to do is drink a half a pint to a pint of whiskey or bourbon or vodka or tequila, whatever. Half a pint to a pint of hard liquor every day for 15 to 20 years, and you're toast. Liver cirrhosis will set in, and you'll die a painful, horrible death the last 2 to 3 years of your life. It's a no-brainer, easy to do. Now, raise your hand if you want to do that. Most people don't want to do that. So, but if you do, you will accelerate the speed at which you're losing circulation to the liver, because the inflammatory changes from excessive drinking will cause an increased loss of capillary blood flow to the last 2 to 3, 4, 5% of your capillary beds, and you will kill your liver way faster than a non-drinker would. And a big chunk of it will be to the lack of circulation. So, obviously, don't drink that much. And so, to explain this, well, how and why do we lose circulation? I mean, if you're not broken with disease, why would the body not be able to flow blood to the last 2 to 3% of each organ in your body? Well, let's do the numbers. This is a numbers game. There are 40 trillion cells in the human body. Not billion, 40 trillion. There are 100 billion capillary beds that feed those cells. And there's 100 billion terminal capillary arteries and veins. Now, that doesn't make sense to you unless you have some science background. So let's not even try to explain that. I mean, this is really a visual thing, but I think we can do it even on a podcast. All you have to do is know about roads that end in a supermarket and houses. Roads, supermarkets, and houses. That's all you have to visualize. So I want you to visualize whatever grocery store you go to. The grocery store, if you see it, that's a capillary bed. And the road that took you to that grocery store, imagine it being a dead-end road on one side, and there's another road on the other side of the supermarket. And there's 400 homes jammed in really close around the parking lot of this supermarket. So the houses, these homes, would be the cells of your body. And there's about 400 cells around every capillary bed, which would be the supermarket. And then the roads would be an artery and a vein. Well, you have in your body 40 trillion houses. And they're grouped together in 400s, and they surround a supermarket. You have 100 billion supermarkets in your body. And you have 100 billion roads that go in and roads that go out. 100 billion of those roads. And that's how our body works. The supply trucks come down the road, stock up the supermarket, and the people come out of the houses, and they dump off all their trash in the parking lot, and they pick up all their food from the store. Well, that's how our cells work. Our cells get the arterial blood flow at the capillary bed at the supermarket, and they get 1,000 things, nutrients, vitamins, minerals, hormones, enzymes, everything. And then they suck that all in from the artery, oxygen, and then they get rid of their trash and CO2 and everything else, and it goes into the parking lot and then into the vein, and the trash truck's carried away. We have 100 billion of these. Well, due to the inflammatory changes and other factors of life, The food trucks don't start showing up at the supermarket, so they don't get enough food. The roads get broken down, so you can't deliver the food. The trash trucks can't come and take the trash away. The people in the houses are having problems getting out of their house and getting into the supermarket. The list goes on and on. The supermarket doesn't have enough people to stock the shelves. The human body has all these changes that are occurring with age. And so we are losing, because of all these factors, 2 to 3% of our capillary flow with age. And so people in the homes are starving to death. And so what happens, in the human body is you start losing 2 to 3% of cell function at around 45 years old at different rates for different organs. And so it becomes a mathematical game. If you're losing 2.5% of cell functions, of cellular function, of your muscles, of your brain, of your liver, of all the organs in your body, at 45 years old, by the time you're 75, 30 years later, it's 30 times 2.5, that's 75% loss of cellular function of each organ that's occurring to. That means you're 75% dead at 75. You only have 25% brain power, 25% heart power, 25% muscle power. See how that works? And if you're going to be dead at 80, then at 75 years old, you're going to be functioning at 25%, and then 20%, and then 17%, and then 12%, until you're, over half dead, soon to be all dead, and then you will be dead at 80. Now, all of that loss of life and function is just accounted for by one of the 10 theories of aging that's robbing us of our optimal health. And so some of the amazing things we understand about this, I'm describing cells as dying, but they don't really die. As you lose the circulation, the cells go into a hibernation state. Now, most people don't know this, but humans hibernate. All mammals hibernate, but we hibernate at a cellular level. Bears go to sleep, and other mammals. But we don't do that. Our cells, when they're faced with starvation from blood and oxygen and all the nutrients, they go into a hibernation state, which makes them need less than 1/5 of the normal supply of blood to stay alive. Either way, they're non-functional. So that's why you lose memory with age, your ability to figure stuff out, your strength goes, your endurance. All these things we see changing, in part, are so vastly due. I mean, this is the number one thing. We lose our quality of life with age. And so, as I said, this is a huge thing for why we lose function. And so the obvious question in your mind should be, well, I don't want to lose 2 to 3% of my cellular function starting at age 45. So how do we go about doing that? Well, that's what we'll talk about when I come back from the break. Hi, everybody. Dr. Debunk here. And I bet you think this is going to be a commercial about KSK Cold Spray. But you're wrong, because if you've been listening to my podcast, then you know I've been pushing my spray. But the flu season's over. And so I wanted to mention to you something that some of you know I do, but that is about weight loss and weight maintenance, or controlling your weight, the whole subject of weight. I've mentioned it in some of my podcasts, giving little bits of information. But I have been studying weight and helping my patients lose and then maintain weight for 11 years. And this program I've developed with much trial and suffering is now capable of getting 30 to 50 pounds off just about anybody in 3 to 4 months. You heard it right, 30 to 50 pounds, 3 or 4 months. And so what you should do is, just to get some information, so what you should do is go to Dr. Debunk website, that's drdebunk.com. If you haven't been there, there's videos and some information, but I have a little introductory video there about weight, how it works, why we are so fat in America, why it's so difficult. It's about 30 minutes, and if you watch it, you'll get it. You'll get what I do, what I can do for you, and how the program works. So that's it. I'm Dr. Debunk, the medical truth teller. Hi, welcome back. So I have been talking about the circulatory theory of aging, and I explained to you how it works and why. And so, therefore, starting back, if you don't want to lose cellular function at a 2 to 3% rate, which I call cellular suicide, if you don't want to commit cellular suicide at a 2 to 3% rate, what do you do? And again, the question is, raise your hand high. With my super secret X-ray vision, I can see you. How many of you want to commit cellular suicide starting at age 45? Raise your hand high. Nobody? Good. So, it should be self-evident to some of you, but what would be the number one way to increase circulation to every part of your body so that you don't commit cellular suicide? Exercise. And not just any exercise, but hard exercise. And so exercise has been a fascinating area of research for the last 40 years because we've brought so much science to it. I mean, you can hear all these opinions about what type of exercise you should do, and people talk about it all differently. They've made something very simple into very complex. And it's been a pet peeve of mine forever because I've always been a sporty guy, basketball, racquetball. I never found a cliff I didn't want to jump off with or without a parachute. So to a degree, I've kind of abused my body some. But, and as I became a doctor, and I've looked hard at exercise physiology and the theories and what athletes do. I mean, they have analyzed the body functions of athletes under extreme activity for the last 30 years aggressively. And so my point is, we know what the optimal form of exercise is, and we know the rules. And so it can be summarized very succinctly here, which I'm going to do. So here's the rule, the most important rule for exercise. Humans, that would be you, unless you're a Martian, humans need to work out as hard as they can at every decade of life without hurting themselves. And so that means it's a little different how we exercise in our 20s versus our 30s versus 40s. It does change. But we need to work out as hard as we can each decade and without hurting ourselves in the long run. And if you do that, you will have satisfied the circulatory theory of aging at an 80-90% rate, because there's other things you can do besides exercise to satisfy the optimal health principles of the circulatory theory of aging. But exercise is broken down into 3 parts or 3 types. I mean, you have cardiovascular, you have strengthening or weightlifting, what most people think, but that's not the only way to build strength, and then full body range of motion, stretching, Pilates, yoga, whatever. Cardio, weights, full stretching. We humans need to do all 3 our entire life as hard as we can without hurting ourselves at every decade of life. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of that because that's another podcast. That's a couple of podcasts. But without a doubt, exercisers, people that regularly exercise over their whole life, in many ways you could almost build the argument that they will outlive everybody. That as far as absolute life, if you were going to do one thing to live the longest and healthiest, exercise trumps just about everything else. Now, that's not absolute, but the data supports that. That like people that have great exercise habits will outlive people that have great eating habits but don't exercise. Now, you nutrition people don't want to believe that, but it's absolutely true. That you can get away with eating a lot more junk if you exercise hard. And so somebody that had a perfect vegan, organic, super duper diet, whatever, tree hugging type person, which I'm not against that at all, would not live as long as somebody who exercised and they didn't. The exercisers would outlive them, probably by 10 years. Anyway, but in this case, we're talking about how it affects circulation, because when you exercise cardio as hard as you can without hurting yourself, you are increasing the blood supply 5 times normal. You're putting blood down to that last 2 or 3% of capillary beds that don't normally get it. All those people in those houses that aren't getting food, that are like, living on peanuts from the store, all of a sudden the food trucks show up. And so you radically change the status. I mean, over the many decades that I've pushed this, it's an amazing thing to watch a 60-year-old, 70-year-old, even 80-year-old person start to increase their activity level, start to apply these principles. And in 3 to 4 months, they are dramatically different. I mean, something I tell patients all the time is like, when people come to me over 50 and their life's a mess because of all the dopey American habits they have, I say, give me 4 to 6 months, and if I don't make you feel 10 years younger, fire me. And exercise is a huge component. We just don't realize how sedentary we've got in America. And so I'll just go over briefly the 3 types of exercise. As I said, I can't get into the details of it. But so cardiovascular exercise is just that. It's running, jogging, elliptical, treadmill, bike, swimming, sports. And that really breaks down 2 ways. There's intensity or endurance. There's like if you were a runner, you can run long distance or you could run short bursts. You could run as hard as you can for 10 seconds, wind sprints, or do the long term. I think the data is clear that intensity is better than endurance, but not absolute. And so, but given the American lifestyle, if you bring practicality into exercise, which is an important thing to do with everything, that Americans do better with 15 minutes of wind sprints versus 45 minutes of jogging long term. But, that's more on that later. And then the second area would be weightlifting and strengthening. Strengthening is important. That has a different way of helping circulation that I won't even get into. A lot of indirect stuff. But the main thing it does, just to give you something, is when you lift heavier weights, especially men, you're literally squeezing the stagnant blood at those last 2 to 3% capillary beds out. And that is kind of a principle. Men should lift as heavy a weights as they can at every decade of life without hurting themselves. Now, it's easy to overtrain with this, and there's a whole podcast I'll be doing on that. And women is different, obviously, because most women don't want to bulk up. So women do a different form. That's more endurance, high reps, light weights. There's a whole way to train and do that. But very important. It also is the number one way to prevent injury with age. It's also the number one way to prevent osteoporosis, which is a big deal to women. All this dopey things doctors say. We have all these dopey medicines, which, by the way, those medicines are nasty, ladies. For older ladies, the medicines that so-called prevent osteoporosis are not necessary for healthy people. You don't need that. You can do all these natural things. There's a whole supplement regimen that I do with patients so they don't have to take those meds. Anyway, side issue. And then the third area that I said was full body motion. The human body was made to have full range of motion at all decades of life. And so stretching exercises, but what people do now is yoga, Pilates, and all different things. I mean, and there's a way to do that. There's a lot of different techniques. And then you can mix stuff up. For people that really don't have time, if you had no time but you had access to a pool, swimming can do all 3 at once. It can do full body motion, stretching, weights, and cardio at once. But you can do like a CrossFit Nautilus workout routine, just for one example. If you go to a gym, you could go through weights and you just go from machine to machine to machine. You never let your heart rate get down. So it's like you're running from machine to machine. And you can do a 15-minute workout and do your cardio intensely and weights. So a lot of variations, like I said. I'll go into that in detail when I get to the podcast on how to do the exercise at length. And so the final thing here that's important is to understand there are other aspects of increasing circulation to the terminal capillary beds. And I'll go into that in detail in other podcasts. But it's things like saunas and jacuzzi and something called inversion therapy. There are other factors that increase circulation to our terminal capillary beds that are critical to those last supermarkets, the last 2 to 3% of the supermarkets in your body. How do you resupply them? How do you address that? That's really beyond the scope of this. But so as a little summary, real quick, the circulatory theory of aging, if you violate it, the top 1 to 2%, it's the top 1 or 2 catastrophic things you can do as far as robbing you of your health, prematurely aging you and marching you towards disease. It's critical. And the top 2 things Americans abuse with our modern lifestyle is too many carbs and not enough exercise. I mean, they're equally catastrophic that we do. The third thing would be lack of sleep. Now, I'm assuming you're not a crazy psychopathic, coking, boozing, crazy person you're married and you're screwing around on your partner, mentally psycho. If you're not a mental psycho like that, sneaking around at night when no one's looking, if you're just a typical American, you got 3 problems. You're eating too many carbs, you don't exercise enough, and you don't sleep enough. And so the carbs and the exercise, 2 subjects, but the exercise is really based on the circulatory theory of aging. And so you will begin to lose, as a summary here, 2 to 3% of circulation due to a lot of factors at 45 years old. The main one being that's the beginning of the chronic inflammatory phase of life when we lose control of inflammation, and nothing will wreck your circulation as fast as uncontrolled chronic inflammation. There's other factors, but that's the main one. And so since that begins, for a lot of other reasons in the 40s, it starts the process and you are committing cellular suicide at a 2 to 3% rate every year starting around 45 at different rates for different organs until you finally will completely kill off enough of your cell mass that you will die. And it will be of disease from 72 to 80 years old. And most people don't like that movie. We want the optimal health of 105 plus or minus 5 with great quality of life all the way there, dying of old age. And so this is the way, exercise with these other factors, are the way you prevent the acceleration of the loss of circulation to the terminal capillary beds or supermarkets in your body. And so that's pretty much it. This has been an introduction. I'm Dr. Debunk, debunking medical myths, garbage, and crap spread by doctors and other health professionals. Thanks for listening.